Throughout his life, artist and historian James E. Kelly held a deep reverence for Abraham Lincoln and continually sought out those who knew the martyred president.
Some of my notes on Abraham Lincoln may seem unimportant and trivial, but as even a glimpse of one you love may give pleasure, I include them all. James Edward Kelly.
Kelly very much wanted to meet Dr. Charles A. Leale, who was the first surgeon to reach the mortally wounded President Lincoln. Dr. Charles Augustus Leale, January 20th, 1922. I called on Dr. Charles Leale at his home on the northwest corner of Madison Avenue and 52nd Street with an introduction from Colonel Henry L. Swords. The doctor is very reticent about giving information about his association with Lincoln, but Colonel Swords' letters seemed to open his heart. The doctor came out and greeted me in a cheerful, friendly manner. He was erect, sturdy, and full-chested, slightly bald with close-cropped gray hair, and flowing white mustache. There was a small mole on the right side of his forehead. He had a fine, full, well-developed brow, cool, earnest, but kind gray eyes, strong nose, broad at the arch, and resolute, well-set jaws. His whole bearing in keeping with his figure, lusty, and wholesome. He spoke with great affection of Colonel Swords, and started to show me his collection of pictures. Stopping before a large engraving of the death of Lincoln, he pointed out his own portrait in the groups, saying, "I held President Lincoln's right hand when he died." Doctor, I look on this opportunity of meeting you as a great privilege, as I have long waited to see the man who breathed the breath of life into Lincoln. The doctor looked at me earnestly, hesitated slightly, and then replied, "I never heard it put that way. In fact, I do not talk of it much, not even to my family, as the memory is painful, and to be identified with an event like that is apt to blight one's career. For regardless of what else he may do, people think of that event only when they meet him. Yes, but there are certain events that force themselves into a man's life that place him in a position where he ceases to belong to himself, but becomes the heritage of his nation, and that deed and that event he should cherish as an honor to himself and his family, as well as a contribution to history. To me, summing up your whole career, you stand like a line in poetry, the man who breathed the breath of life into Lincoln." "Yes," he replied reflectively, "I did breathe the breath of life into Lincoln. When I entered the box, after some delay, for it had been blocked with a bar of wood, I found President Lincoln lying back in his chair. Here he acted it out, his body inclined to the right, and his head leaning forward on the right side. I loosened his cravat. It was the kind my mother used to get me when I was a boy. It came round with a tongue which slipped down into the knot in front. I understood it, so there was no delay. I loosened it and placed him on the floor. Opening his shirt, I found his breathing had ceased and his heart had stopped. It was then I thought of three things. First, of my mother. She was a saint. Second, of how she told me the Bible story of the prophet who breathed the breath of life into. Third, then I thought of the successful way. So I knelt down with my knees on each side of him. Holding his nose, I placed a handkerchief around his mouth and breathed into his lungs. If I had not held his nose, the air would have escaped through his nostrils. I then pulled up his shirt and massaged his heart. It may have taken about an hour. I also raised his legs up and down to bring the blood up into his head. Dr. King and Dr. Taft came in, but there were no suggestions. The reason Surgeon General Barnes was not there was because Secretary Seward had been stabbed during the evening, and he had been called there. So he did not know that President Lincoln had been shot. Doctor, there are various reports as to how he was carried out. Some say he was carried on a door, etc. It was this way. I took charge of his head. Dr. Taft held his right side. Dr. King held his left. Two men I do not know took hold of his legs. The doctor then went to the picture of the death scene and pointed out various figures, mentioning their names. There were not so many in the room at any one time. Of course, there were many there I did not recognize, They kept coming and going. I cleared most of them out at one time, but when the picture was painted, they all wanted to be in. I posed for 3 paintings. One was Alonzo Chapel. When Dr. Barnes came in, there were no suggestions. President Johnson was present for only a short time. There is a high official, James Tanner, in Washington, who told me Johnson was not there. But I saw him there. I noticed him particularly, as I felt he would be the next president. Had you ever met Lincoln before? No, but I heard him make his last speech. He stood under, the portico of the White House. Lincoln was 100% man. He had not a single flaw in any part of his body. He was very lean, for no man had ever been so tried. He had well-developed muscles, without any avoirdupois tissue on his abdomen. He did not wear his hair unduly long. It was slightly wavy and of a dark color. The doctor reflectively said, "I have to stir up my memory of things I have not thought of for a long time." The doctor continued, "He stood erect. When he met a person shorter than himself, he would stoop in an affable manner, as when he would talk to children on the street, as was his custom. He stood quite erect when he spoke. You ought to make him quite erect. But one thing I want to tell you. Do not make him short-waisted and long-legged, as a certain distinguished sculptor has done in the Museum of Art. He had large hands and large joints. They make a good deal of that wart on his face. The fact is, it was hardly noticeable. I had a good opportunity to study his figure. He had a most remarkable leg. I noticed it when I chafed it to bring back the circulation. When I was in Rome, I noticed the statue of Moses by Michelangelo. When I saw it, I said, That is the leg of Lincoln." When President Lincoln's body was sent to the White House, Mrs. Lincoln sent for me, and I took a position at the left of the casket and remained there. I did it also after he was taken to the Capitol. As the doctor talked, he sat back in his chair, and I was attracted by the power and yet refined strength of his hands. The doctor continued, "When the assassin shot President Lincoln, I never mention his name." Here the doctor stepped forward, and placing his right forefinger at the left and back of my skull, he said, "The bullet went in here and lodged above the eye." The jab he gave my head as he did this made me feel as though I had been shot myself, and emphasized for all time where the bullet had pierced the skull of Lincoln. Returning to his chair and sitting back, he seemed to go into a dreamy retrospect, and, muttering to himself, "Yes, I breathed the breath of life into Lincoln." Then, rousing himself, he said emphatically, "Make him symmetrical, and in a most emphatic manner, and in correct proportions." From Lincoln, Dr. Leale branched off on the character of Washington, and told me of a photograph he had taken of the bronze Washington at prayer. I told him I had made the bronze. He was surprised, and questioned me all about it from start to finish. As I was leaving, he came to the elevator with me. He said, "What a great art is sculpture! Every stroke endures. But if you never make anything else than that, Washington at prayer, you have not lived in vain. God bless you." Dr. Leale died on June 13, 1932, at age 90. By then, all of the old soldiers Kelly portrayed had passed on, and within a year, the artist would join them.